A rich woman humiliates a beggar, but she didn't know he owned everything around. She stepped out of her luxurious car as if she were the owner of the entire space, carrying an aura of superiority that seemed unbreakable. Her expensive shoes touched the ground as if each step marked her importance in the world. At the door of the city's most exclusive restaurant, she saw a man sitting, dirty and in tattered clothes, almost part of the landscape ignored by everyone. Without hesitation, she cast him a disdainful look and uttered a phrase laden with contempt. "People like you shouldn't even be here." But what seemed like a banal interaction carried a secret that would change not only her night, but her entire perception of who really controls the game of life. She was known for her arrogance and the relentless way she treated others. It didn't matter if it was a waiter who made a minor mistake or a driver who took a few extra seconds to open the car door. Everyone was a target of her disdain. The woman lived in a world where wealth dictated the rules, and she was the queen. However, her fortune couldn't mask the coldness of her words and the emptiness of her actions. At the restaurant, her friends commented on her confident attitude, but they didn't realize how much it pushed away any trace of humanity that might still exist within her. Meanwhile, the beggar remained still, but there was something about him that stood out. His eyes, even tired, held an unusual intensity, as if they saw far beyond the superficial. Despite his worn appearance, one detail caught attention. On his wrist, hidden under the tattered sleeve, was an antique luxury watch, something that didn't seem to belong in that setting. When she confronted him with disdain, he responded with an unsettling calmness. "Not everything is as it seems, my lady. Sometimes appearances are the greatest trap." The phrase, spoken in a polite tone, seemed to resonate in much deeper layers than any insult. The woman ignored the man's words, laughing to herself, certain he was just another desperate soul. Dinner continued, but a series of events began to undermine her confidence. First, the restaurant manager, always so submissive, treated her coldly and distantly. Then, when she asked the valet to fetch her car, there was an inexplicable delay, followed by embarrassment. By mistake, the car was handed over to the beggar, who drove it calmly, while the onlookers were left dumbfounded. The shock was evident, but she refused to believe that man had any importance. Still, something began to deeply unsettle her. No matter how hard she tried to disguise it, the atmosphere felt charged with tension, as if everyone knew something she didn't. The restaurant, which had always been a symbol of exclusivity, now felt like a theater where she was the only one unaware of her role. And at the center of it all was that mysterious man whose presence, even in silence, was becoming unbearable. The beggar, who until then seemed merely a supporting character in an ordinary night, began to reveal a demeanor that contradicted everything his appearance suggested. He stood up calmly, looked at the woman, and without losing his composure, said something no one expected. "My lady, sometimes those who seem to have the least possess more than you can imagine." The phrase echoed in the hall, leaving the guests uncomfortable, but she, in her habitual arrogance, merely rolled her eyes and returned to ignoring him. However, this was just the beginning of a series of events that would turn her night upside down. The restaurant, known for its impeccable service, began to experience strange problems. The waiter, who always rushed to serve her table, seemed distracted and distant. The main course took longer than usual, and when it finally arrived, it was cold. To make matters worse, the bill came with grotesque errors that left the woman irritated. Each small incident seemed to dismantle the pedestal she placed herself on, while the beggar, outside, remained impassive, as if he were observing everything from afar. As she left the restaurant, determined to end that night with an air of superiority, the woman was confronted with yet another surprise. The car that the valet had delivered to the beggar was not returned. Desperate, she began calling acquaintances and the restaurant management, demanding answers. But what she received were vague looks and evasive apologies. The sense of control she so valued began to slip through her fingers, and for the first time in years, she tasted the bitterness of helplessness. They determined that the car should be somewhere nearby, so she decided to follow the beggar. The man walked leisurely through the illuminated streets, as if he knew exactly where he was going. Intrigued and furious, she followed him at a safe distance, trying to understand who he was and how he dared to challenge her position. With each corner, her curiosity mixed with indignation, creating a confusion of feelings she couldn't control. The walk led her to an apparently abandoned building. Its broken windows and worn facade were no different from other forgotten buildings in that part of the city. However, as soon as the man opened the door, she glimpsed something completely unexpected. The interior was impressively organized and filled with items that seemed to have priceless value. Shelves full of ancient books, carefully arranged pieces of art, and even jewelry that sparkled under the dim light of the room. Astonished, she confronted him, asking how a beggar could possess such refined things in a place like that. He listened to her in silence, allowing her to vent all her indignation before responding with an unsettling calmness. "You are trapped by what the eyes can see. That's why you never go beyond the surface of things." His response not only silenced her but also made her uncomfortably aware of her own superficiality. He began to reveal parts of his story. He told her that he had once been a successful businessman, owner of companies that moved millions, but lost everything after trusting the wrong people. Instead of sinking into self-pity, he chose to live minimally to discover what truly mattered in life. Over time, he discreetly bought several properties in that area, becoming a mysterious owner that almost no one knew. The woman, unable to process everything she had just heard, became even more unsettled when a local merchant appeared in the building and greeted the man with reverence. "Good evening, sir. Do you need anything tonight?" asked the merchant, clearly aware of who he really was. At that moment, the facade she had built over the years began to crack, as the truth was as clear as the sparkle of the jewels in the back of the room. He looked her directly in the eyes and said something that hit her like a blast of cold wind. "You judge the world by your ruler, but forget that the measurements can change depending on who holds the instrument." That phrase, laden with wisdom and critique, made her reflect on each of her actions up to that moment. Her haughty posture began to give way to an internal confusion she didn't know how to handle. The woman tried to justify herself, claiming that everything she did was the result of years of struggle and sacrifice. But he simply smiled, as if he already knew exactly what she would say. "The problem isn't what you have, but what you do with it. Wealth without purpose is just a burden disguised as achievement." He began to organize the books on one of the shelves, as if continuing the conversation was no longer important. She, on her part, remained motionless, feeling for the first time the weight of her own insignificance in front of someone who, ironically, seemed to need nothing. Determined to unmask the man who seemed to challenge all her certainties, the woman did not back down. She began to observe every detail of that unlikely environment, trying to find a logical explanation for what was happening. Who was that man who, just a few hours ago, seemed like a mere beggar but now exuded an air of authority? Even without admitting it to herself, she knew there was something deeply unsettling about him. Something that made her question everything she believed she knew about wealth and power. From that point on, she decided to investigate further. She returned to the restaurant the next day to speak with the manager, demanding information about the mysterious man. The manager, however, seemed to avoid the conversation, looking away as he said, "He is someone important around here, but he doesn't like to draw attention." That phrase, spoken with a tone of almost reverential respect, only heightened her curiosity and at the same time her frustration. How could someone so simple and humble be treated as if he were the most influential figure in the city? Intrigued, she began to notice other connections. As she walked through the neighborhood, she realized that various merchants treated the beggar with the same reverence. There was something strange there. Store owners, bank managers, and even the residents seemed to recognize him in a way that completely contrasted with his initial appearance. Gradually, she began to piece together a puzzle. Each piece revealed that the man had an influence that went far beyond what his appearance suggested. But how could someone with so much power choose to live as a mere beggar? The turning point came when she followed him to a discreet cafe, where he met with figures she recognized from high society social events. The woman hid, observing the scene. The beggar, always serene, seemed to lead the conversation with ease, while the others listened attentively. When he left a considerable tip on the table, as if it were a natural gesture. It was impossible to ignore. He not only knew these people, but also seemed to command their respect. All of this left her even more unsettled. With each new discovery, the woman felt her haughty posture unraveling. The questions that once seemed irrelevant now became urgent. Who was that man? Why did he choose to live that way? More importantly, what was he trying to prove with all of this? Despite all the answers she sought, what troubled her most was the feeling that he wasn't acting out of revenge or pride, but for something much greater that she still couldn't comprehend. And that left her with a growing unease, as if she were facing a lesson she never wanted to learn, but was now impossible to ignore. When she finally confronted him, her tone was no longer one of arrogance, but of confusion mixed with indignation. "Who do you think you are?" she asked, her voice trembling for the first time in years. The man, with the calmness that seemed to be his trademark, simply smiled before responding, "I am someone who learned to see beyond appearances, something you apparently still lack." He took her to a room in one of the buildings that, surprisingly, he also owned. There, a huge table full of documents revealed an impossible fact to ignore. He was the true owner of almost all the stores, restaurants and lands she frequented with such pride. The restaurant where she had humiliated him, the valet who had mistakenly delivered her car, even that seemingly abandoned building, it all belonged to him. The revelation was a blow. She, who had always considered herself superior because of her wealth, now discovered that she was completely at the mercy of a man she had previously despised as insignificant. But the most surprising thing was how he handled the situation. There was no pride in his voice, no attempt to humiliate her as she had done to him. Instead, he spoke with an almost paternal tone, as if he were trying to teach a lesson. "I chose to live this way because I wanted to understand what truly matters in life. Power, money, all of that is empty without purpose. But you, who have so much, seem to be more lost than I ever was." His words were not just criticisms. They were a mirror, reflecting the reality she never wanted to see. Before leaving her, he did something unexpected. He placed in her hands a document indicating that she had received a small share of his properties. "Consider this a second chance," he said. "What you do with it will truly define who you are." Stunned, she didn't know how to react. For the first time in her life, she felt the humiliation she had so often imposed on others, but mixed with an unexpected opportunity for redemption. As the man calmly walked out the door, she stood still, her mind spinning between shock, guilt, and a new realization. Perhaps, for the first time, she was facing something that not all the money in the world could buy, the chance to become a better person. As the woman looked at the document in her hands, an avalanche of thoughts hit her. For the first time, she realized that her entire life had been built around an incessant pursuit of power and status, without considering the impact it had on the people around her. The humiliation she felt was not just a blow to her ego, but also an opportunity to re-evaluate what truly mattered. Perhaps the man was right. Wealth without purpose was a burden, and she had wasted years of her life carrying an empty weight. But now, with this second chance, the question echoing in her mind was simple, yet devastating. What would she do to redeem herself? This unexpected lesson placed her before a choice that few have the courage to face: to change or to remain the same. Stories like this challenge us to look within ourselves and question our values. How many times have we judged others based on what we see, without knowing what truly lies behind appearances? The woman was fortunate to encounter someone willing to teach her a lesson in humility, but not everyone will have that chance. And you, how have you used your opportunities? Are you merely seeking to accumulate, or are you willing to transform your wealth, whether material or emotional, into something that truly makes a difference in the world? This story is not just about her, it's about all of us. What attitudes do you need to change today to be a better person tomorrow? Think about it, and if you believe you can inspire others, share this video. Together, let's build a reality where true values surpass fleeting appearances.